Hi everyone, Jordan here, bringing to you a video about my garden plans for the late winter, early spring for 2026. So today I am going to be starting a bunch of seeds that I have here in front of me that I'll show you guys in a bit. But I kind of just wanted to share my process with you all about how I go about starting my seeds. I should be able to give you guys a glimpse of what my setup looks like, and then of course sharing the seeds that I'm starting with you today. So the plan for now, obviously at the time of this recording, we are on January 2nd. Yes, today is Friday, January 2nd, 2026. So fresh into the new calendar year. And I am preparing to have some veggies for part of this cold season. So it'll be late winter. These crops at least will be going from late winter into the early part of spring before we get ready before we get ready for the late spring and summer garden. So all of what I have here today that I'm starting are cold hardy plants, so lots of kale, lots of brassicas, I have some herbs here as well. I'm debating if I want to start some lettuces. Usually I direct sow my lettuce seeds, but have seen a few other gardeners starting their lettuce seeds prior to planting them outside, and it always looks like it works out well for them. I just haven't tried it personally myself. So that is something I am still debating if I want to start today. But yeah, I'm gonna give you guys just a look into what starting seeds looks like for me. So right here, hopefully get this in the camera view, is my seed starting mix. And I'll grab the bag so I can show you guys exactly which one it is. But this is the Jiffy seed starting mix. Now, obviously you can purchase your own seed starting mix from the store. You can also make your own seed starting mix. The thing with seed starting mix in particular is that there are no nutrients in this planting material. So when you compare it to something like a potting soil, whether that be indoor or outdoor, those potting soils will generally have some fertilizer or some additional nutrients added into their those soil mixes, so that it can feed the plants for a at least a given amount of time that the plant should be in that potting mix. Obviously, especially if we're thinking about indoor potting mixes where there are no at least external environmental factors, they don't really get much in regards to food and nutrients within the soil unless you manually add them to the soil. So that's the main thing. Seed starting mix is sterile, whereas like a potting mix is going to have some additional fertilizer or nutrients added into it. Now, you can also add nutrients into your into your seed starting mix. And that could look like a bunch of different things. Worm castings, compost, several different things that you could add into here to add some nutrients into your seed starting mix. Now, one reason it's not really needed is because when a seed is going into the first phase of growth, it doesn't need a whole lot of nutrients because it has a preset amount of nutrients within the seed to get the seed started. Generally, the rule is once a seed produces its first true leaf, that is when it will begin to need food and nutrients added to it so that it can continue to grow strong and healthy. But when it's first starting out, it's not really necessary. My process is just simply starting with the seed starting mix, and then as the plants or the seedlings grow bigger, and they begin, usually for me, they have 2 or 3 true leaves before I begin to add any sort of fertilizer. But once we get to that point, I usually will add a liquid fertilizer into what I use to water these seedlings, to add in those nutrients that they might need during their growth phase before they get transplanted into the garden. So yeah, just a quick little knowledge breakdown on seed starting mix versus potting soil, and you know how the two can differ, and also some other things to take into consideration as you are starting your own plants and your own seedlings. So what I'm gonna do here, this is already wet. So I wet this down, and I actually did it with some boiling water. I still have my kettle out from when I used it. But this is a trick I learned from Gary at the Rustic Garden when I first started my gardening journey. This is back in 2019. So Gary at the Rustic Garden was one of the first people I came across on YouTube. And one thing that he does is with his seed starting mix, he will use boiling water to wet the seed starting mix. And his reasoning was because if there happened to be any sort of pest eggs, usually they would be like fungus gnats. So if there are any fungus gnat eggs in this mix, the boiling water will kill those eggs off and give your seedlings a better chance from the start, right? Now, in my experience, I've never had a season where I've started plants and I have never seen fungus gnats on my seedling starts. So I don't think it's always completely avoidable, but it's something I've been doing since I started my journey. It's probably something I will always do unless I get to the point where I feel like that's no longer necessary, or I don't believe it's necessary any longer. But yeah, I just wanted to share that just because that's what I do, and that's what I learned from Gary at the Rustic Garden. Highly recommend that you check out his channel if you do not know who that is. Gary is a wealth of knowledge. He's been gardening for several years. I couldn't even tell you how many at this point, but he provides so much information and such a variety and diverse amount of information on the garden and the ways you can grow and grow practically. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill up my seed trays. So I have just one tray here, and I'm only going to be starting this one tray today, but I have a bunch of these 6-cell pots within my big 10-20 tray, and I'm going to fill each of these 6-cell pots with the seed starting mix, the wet seed starting mix, so that once they're filled up, I can start planting my seeds within them. Also want to note that you want your seed starting mix when you wet it to be wet to the point where it is clumping together. And when you squeeze it, maybe a drop or two of water comes out. You don't want it to be so sopping wet that when you pick it up and squeeze it, it just drains a whole bunch of water. So keep that in mind. Obviously, there is a margin for error here, so don't be too stressed out if you get it a little too wet. But yeah, just a rule of thumb to take into consideration. And before I forget, this is the seed starting mix that I am using today. Does it have to be organic? No. I tend to get organic, but in my opinion, it does not absolutely have to be organic. Use what you can find. If you have resources at home to create your own, I highly recommend you do that. Generally, I believe seed starting mix is composed of something like a coco coir or peat moss, and usually some perlite, or if not perlite, there's another one that I cannot think of. It looks just like perlite, but I think it's a bit finer. I'll post the name of it on the screen if I can remember, and if I can't, I might cut this part of the video out. So yeah. But I'm going to begin filling up my cells with the seed starting mix. All right, be prepared to get your hands messy. Obviously, wear gloves if you want, but be prepared to get a little bit messy with this process, because what you're going to want to do with your mix when you're placing them into the cells, especially something like this that has multiple cells, you're going to want to compact and push the seed starting mix down, just to compact it a little bit at the bottom of each of these plugs or cells. And this really is just to assist with the seedlings to be able to grow a stronger root system, right? So they'll push through that dirt to reach the bottom of the cell to get to the water. So usually I'll fill each one up once, right? Fill it up once, push the first filling up down into each cell pretty firmly to compact it a bit, and then I'll fill it up a second time, and I'll still push the starting mix down, but I won't push it down as compactly, because what you don't want is for when you put your seeds in here, for the soil or the seed starting mix to be too compact, which could delay or prevent the seeds from germinating. So the bottom of each of your cells should be pretty compact. The top you want to leave a little bit looser. Still compact it ever so slightly so that the soil is just not, you know, loosey-goosey and has a bunch of air. Obviously, you want the seeds to be in contact with as much soil as possible so that they can receive the water and the darkness and the contact that they need to be able to germinate. So you want it to be somewhat compact on the top, but not so compact that the seed will struggle with germinating and coming up out of the soil, or the seed starting mix in this case. So I'm gonna keep filling these up just as I explained. And then once I am done filling these up, I will come back to you guys and show you how I place my seeds in each of these cells. A quick word on these trays that I'm using. You can find trays like these at your local big box stores. They may carry some in some of the smaller like tool and hardware stores. Think like Harbor Freight and Tractor Supply. But I've gotten a lot of these from Walmart, Lowe's. Some of these actually even came directly from Gary at the Rusted Garden, who I mentioned earlier in the video. But big box is always going to be a great option that's local to you. And this is the time of year when they're starting to put these supplies in their stores. So you should start to see here soon aisles dedicated to the garden. I know in the last couple of years, our local Walmart has a whole aisle dedicated especially to the vegetable garden and starting flower and vegetable seeds and all of the tools that you could consider using when starting seeds, from trays and cells to grow lights. Obviously the seeds themselves, they even usually will have heating mats. Heating mats aren't something you typically need unless you're growing in a space that's a bit cooler and you're starting something like pepper seeds. Those are seeds that generally need a specific temperature in order to germinate successfully. But yeah, all in all, check out your local big box stores for these types of supplies. I've had these cells for years at this point. I don't have a ton of them anymore like I used to because of several different reasons. But if you have the space and the ability to set them aside and put them in a place where they won't get too bent up or smushed or cracked or anything like that, cracked especially, because once they're cracked they just become harder to use, especially if they're like really torn up. But you definitely can save and reuse these. Now I personally plan on investing in the seed starting kit from the Bootstrap Farmer, mainly because it's a much thicker plastic, so the ability for them to be reusable for longer is much higher. And I imagine they're probably slightly easier to clean and store as well, at least under the condition of them not being so easily to mess up or break or things of that nature. So yeah, I plan on investing in that particular kit just because I believe they will last much longer. I will hold on to these for as long as I can anyway still, even once I do have the new kit, just because I am a proponent of reducing and reusing and recycling for as much as I can, and for as long as it is, you know, still practical for me to do that. So yeah, just a word on, again, where you can get your seed starting supplies, and how you can use and reuse them. Me personally, once I'm done with the garden or planting for whatever season we're in, they usually get set aside and until I'm ready to start my next batch of seeds. Now, ideally, in a perfect world, I would clean them out once all the plants are planted into the ground so that they'll be already clean and ready to go for the next batch of seeds that get started once it's time for that. But still, I would highly recommend that you, regardless, especially if these are not new cells or pots that you're using, clean them simply with soap and water. That's all I use. If you feel called or compelled to use a small amount of bleach to do some sort of disinfecting, or even something like hydrogen peroxide to assist with any sort of disinfecting, then absolutely feel free to do that. In my experience, soap and water has done a fine job on getting the cells clean enough for me to just be able to get the seeds started and growing here in my growing station. So yeah, just another tip on that. All right, as I'm filling up this last cell, I do want to just give you guys a little bit of a background on me, and also give you share with you rather some of my intentions for this channel, and also ask for your input. So I have been gardening since 2019. I started a garden in my grandparents' backyard, and the garden is still in my grandparents' backyard. And I do my best to plant it every year. And my garden has gone through many changes in the time since I've started. But I live in zone 7B/8A up in northeastern North Carolina. And since the day I began the garden, I have enjoyed every bit of it. And now at this point in my life, after taking a bit of a break from the garden for a multitude of different reasons, I am back with the same joy and excitement for it that I had when I first started the garden. And I am looking forward to just sharing my experience with you all, with the world, and hopefully inspire even more people to start garden than have started since I've been growing. It's been such an increase in people that I've seen, even since I've started 6 years ago. So my hope is just to be an inspiration for you, to be encouraged if you have a desire to start a garden, no matter how big or small. So yeah, just sharing my journey, sharing my experience, sharing my tips with you all. And then also getting feedback on, you know, what you guys need help with, what you want more information on, what you would like to see. So since this will most likely be the first video that I post, please share in the comments if you have a garden, and if you don't, if you'd like to start one, and then also just what you would like to see from this channel, what kind of information would be helpful to you in starting your own personal journey, and what else you might possibly be interested in. So yeah, we're done filling our cells with the seed starting mix. So now I'm going to share with you what I am about to start here today, and also give you some insight on how to plant some of these. So as I stated earlier, we have lots of brassicas today. So kales, broccoli, cabbage. We also have some chard here, and lots of herbs. A lot of the herbs I'm going to be starting today are perennial to my area, meaning they will grow back each year after the winter is done and spring is on its way. So I'm going to start off with my kales. A note before we start these, some of these seeds are very old. I took about a 2-year break from the garden, again, for a multitude of reasons. So there's been a period of time from when I've actually grown cold hardy plants and vegetables. So my winter cold hardy seeds in particular are quite old. Some of these are from when I first started my garden in 2019. So the germination rate on these is going to be very questionable. As seeds get older, typically their germination, their likeliness to germinate rather, declines as the seeds age. So what I'm going to do to kind of hopefully counteract that is just plant or sow more seeds than I typically would if this were like a brand new pack of seeds. So yeah, let me show you guys some of what I've been starting. We're gonna start with the kales and the greens. So like I said, a bunch of kales. See, some of these I had transferred into bags. You can't even see like the writing on that because it's so old. I know what it is just because I can kind of see it, but anyways. So we have, I think, just five different types of kales that we're starting for this season. We've got Premier Kale, Red Russian Kale. We've got the blue Scotch. Yes, blue Scotch Vates, curled kale, one of those. Okay, I'll put the name up on the screen. You've got some Dino Kale and some Scarlet Kale. And then I'm also at the same time gonna go ahead and do my rainbow chard and my red chard, and I believe I have just regular old green chard, aka perpetual spinach. One thing I love about this in particular, perpetual spinach, is you can grow it in winter, you can grow it in summer, you can grow it in fall. It's like an all year crop. And one thing I tend to miss in the summer is leafy greens. Obviously, there are so many other vegetables to make up for the leafy greens not really being prevalent in the summer, but I still like a nice leafy green in most occasions. So anyways, I am going to start with I believe I'm going to start with the Scotch. The Vates kale. I am looking over here to pull out these. Now, obviously, I need to clean and relabel these, but these are reusable, what do they call them? Markers or plant labels. So I use these every year. I found these reusable ones specifically, I believe, on a trip to Lowe's a few years ago, and I just stumbled across them and decided to pick them up. Before I was using the reusable plant labels, I was using popsicle sticks, and I believe I still even have some around here somewhere, but use what is accessible and available to you. I used to wrap a piece of tape around the front of, each little individual cell, as long as it had different plants in it, obviously. But I used to wrap a piece of tape around it that had whatever variety or plant it was written on the piece of tape. So do what is most easily accessible to you. You do not have to go out and buy anything extravagant to label and mark your seedlings. Obviously, if you choose to, then that's one thing, but it is absolutely not a requirement. But I'm going to use these. If you do go out and grab something like these reusable ones, you're going to want to write on these in pencil. So that way, when you need to reuse them, you can erase what was written on there from before and put whatever you need new on the plant marker for your new set of seedlings. So I'm gonna prep that here in a second and get those ready. I kind of have my, or I'm going to set my seeds out. I'm going to set my seeds out in the order that I'm going to plant them until I get my seed starts ready. But until then, I'm going to go ahead and show you how we are sowing our seeds today. So as you can see, hopefully you can see that these are kale seeds. They're pretty small. Typically, if these seeds weren't like pretty old and I was unsure about how well they were going to germinate, I would maybe put 3 to 4 seeds into each cell. But since I do not know how well these are going to germinate, I'm going to probably put about 8 to 10, to be honest. And I think what I'm going to do, if for whatever reason a lot of these germinate, what I'm going to do is thin them so there's only 2 plants in each cell. And once they get a little bit bigger after they germinate, maybe once they have 2 to 3 true leaves on each plant, I will separate them and up pot them, especially if they're not ready yet to go into the garden outside, which they most likely won't be. So there's typically always a solution if you run into a problem. So before I place any of these seeds into these cells, I fluff up the starting mix that is in each of the cells, and I'll pick one of these up to show you what that looks like. So hopefully you guys can see how these have already kind of been fluffed up, and I think this one has not. Nope, this one has not been fluffed. So I'm literally just gonna take, you could use a pen, you could use a skewer. I kind of just grab whatever's available. This is my garden pen specifically, and I'm just gonna like zhuzh the soil or the starting mix around, just so that it's not super compacted and some of those seeds can fall into the soil. And the other reason for doing that is so that when I press the soil down again, those seeds will be kind of under the soil. For most seeds, you want them to be under a layer of soil, just to give them the best contact surface area with the growing medium so that they can germinate properly. I don't know if you guys can see. I'm not going to try and show you guys these seeds because they're going to spill everywhere. But again, the kale seeds are pretty tiny, but I'm going to sow pretty heavily just because these seeds are so old. These were the blue Scotch. And I'm literally just going to continue to do this until my seeds are planted. They do all vary in size and shape and all of that. And because of that, you have to adjust just ever so slightly how you sow them. But the rules are still generally the same. So I've got my seeds in, and now I'm pressing the top of the soil down again to make sure those seeds have good surface surface area with a growing medium. And that's that. I only did 1 row within this cell, so you can kind of see the difference. This side I did not plant yet any seeds. This side is where I put those seeds I had poured out into my hand. So you can kind of see where I compacted them down, again, just to make sure that the seeds are touching the soil in all possible areas. All right, so I'm gonna set that down. All kale seeds look the same, at least in my experience. They all are super round, super small. So I'm gonna just continue forward, and I'll show you guys my next batch of seeds, which is gonna be the kale, the chard. Okay, I just finished up sowing my kale seeds. We're going to do now some chard. I'm going to start with the Perpetual Spinach, aka leaf beet chard. I'm going to take some of these out and show you guys what these look like, because they are a bit different from the kale seeds. So hopefully you guys will be able to see what these chard seeds look like. They're still mostly round, but are like pointy and spiky, and they're a bit bigger. So for these, you're going to want to push them down into your growing medium a little bit further. Generally, what you want to do with each seed, depending on the size of it, is you want to push it down far enough to where it is in darkness and the soil is covering the top of the seed from the depth that you planted it enough so that it can germinate properly. Mainly so that when the first leaves are starting or trying to push up out of the soil or the seed starting mix, they can do so by pushing out of the actual seed. And what you will typically see most times when you don't plant a seed deep enough is it will still pop up out of the seed starting mix or growing medium once it germinates, but it will have like a part of its leaf covered with the shell of the seed, or sometimes I've even have seedlings have their leaves completely covered by the shell of the seed because I didn't plant it or push it down deep enough into the growing medium. So keep that in mind when you're planting your seeds, just so that you kind of give your seedlings the best possible start for when you start them. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these chard seeds in the soil. Once I get the amount I want into each cell, I'm going to use the pen I was using to fluff up the seed starting mix to push them down a bit into the medium so that I know I'm giving them a good amount of depth so they can germinate properly. So I'm gonna add a few more seeds and then push them down and keep going about business as usual. Sometimes what will happen also, once you kind of start to compact the top portion of the cells where you didn't compact it so tightly as you did at the bottom, is when you're pushing, especially with bigger seeds, as you're pushing them down into the growing medium, you will kind of lose some of your depth at the top of the cell. So typically what I'll like to do is, if I feel like I need to add a little bit more soil to the top or starting mix to the top, I'll do that. I'll just grab a little pinch like so and just place it on top of whatever cell I feel like needs a little bit of extra seed start mix, and then just kind of lightly press it down. Again, just making sure that it's not too tight, but pressed down enough so that once that seed's ready to germinate, it can push through the top of the seed starting mix. Okay, so I have finished up starting the seeds I'm going to start for today. I've got some empty cells here that I'm just gonna leave until I can come back to this. Still debating. I probably am gonna start some lettuce seeds when I come back to this. Still debating if I want to do the onions. And the biggest reason being is just because I haven't quite done my research on the right timing for growing onions in my zone and in my area, and also not positive if I will have enough space for the onions come time for them to go into the ground. I'm in the middle of a complete garden overhaul and reconstruction, and it's been taking some time, mainly because I'm doing it all by my lonesome. So yeah, I just we'll see what happens with the onions, but I definitely think I'm going to start a few lettuce seeds. So of course I'll update you guys on that. But since I'm finished getting all of my seeds in the seed starting mix that are in the cells, I'm going to set them over on my growing rack and bottom water. Best rule of thumb whenever you're starting seeds indoors especially is to bottom water them. So typically what will happen is you'll put a bunch of different cells into a big 10-20 tray. This is one I got from, I believe, Walmart last year that had a bunch of cells in it. And this one is a little more flimsy than I like. I have some sturdier 10-20 cells. I just have to find them. So you definitely want it to be more sturdy, especially if you're going to be moving them around and things of that nature. You want it to be a nice sturdy 10-20 tray so it can hold your plants and also water for bottom watering. But basically, when you go to bottom water, you just want to remove one of your cell packs out, pour the water into the bottom of the tray, and then set the cell pack that you removed back into the tray and just let them bottom water. If you happen to use a little bit too much, you can obviously you know, remove all the cells. Say if you come back an hour later and there's still a bunch of water sitting in the bottom, you can always remove all of the cells from the tray and just dump that water out, because you don't always want to leave the mix or the growing medium sopping wet, because that can accelerate or sometimes cause mildew and mold growth, which can also encourage fungus gnats. So you want to make sure that you're giving the best conditions possible to your seedlings, at least in your own individual circumstances, so that they can have a good start, and that they can continue to grow well as they you know, take their journey until they go into wherever you're going to be planting them, whether that be in pots or inside or an outside garden or whatever the case may be. So yeah, give them the best conditions as you possibly can with what you have available to you in your own home or dwelling, and just do the best that you can. So yeah, I'm gonna set these over on the growing rack, give them a good water, and then just let them sit. I'll probably give you guys some more information on like my growing station setup and what that looks like, because I do have some lights over there. But being that these are cold hardy crops, I'm probably going to start to take them outside once some of these start to germinate and pop up out of the growing medium, so that they can get acclimated to the outdoor weather and things of that nature. So yeah, I'll be sure to update you guys on the progress, and hopefully we get some decent germination, because I really don't know how some of these seeds are going to do with the germination because they are so old. So I'm hoping that this isn't a total wash and that I get something from these, but if I don't, we always have an alternative, and we'll cross that bridge if we get there, but I'm hoping we don't. Anyways, guys, thank you all for tuning in. As always, if you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.